Yeah. Actually, that's not what we're actually doing. This faculty colloquium on Friday afternoon. Today we have Cody Norton, and I can say this about him. When he started here in 2024, I've been in higher ed for 28 years. I have never seen anybody hit the ground running so hard, so fast, immediately, even before he was employed. He was here in the summer, already getting busy and doing work. So put your hands together and welcome Cody Norton.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a phenomenal time so far here at Lyon, and I've been super excited to present my work and my most recent research with all of you here at Lyon. It's been months in the process, and I'm finally excited to show you what I've been doing. So to get started with this presentation, I really want to frame it not just as an artist talk, but as field research. Work that's grounded in place-based inquiry, qualitative encounters, and queer studies. My practice sits at the intersection of art, cultural documentation, and lived experience, and is guided through the core question: how do queer lives persist and make meaning in rural environments that are often assumed to be hostile, stagnant, or missing altogether from queer archives? Rather than approaching rural queerness as something that is absent, that needs to be explained, my research treats it as something that is existing already and is active in our current reality. But it's just simply difficult to document, preserve, and recognize within dominant historical and academic frameworks. To kind of give you a basis of some of the context with urban versus rural queer studies, across queer history, there is a long-standing tendency to equate visibility with existence. Queer visibility, what does that mean? It means to exist. Within urban centers, within urban spaces, queer history tends to be more visible. Queer histories often emerge in these places where documentation accumulates through organizations, social venues, court records, activist institutions, and being visible through these spaces. But these conditions are far more common in cities rather than rural spaces. As a result, queer history often appears to originate where records are dense, and where records of queerness cannot be ignored, especially in the United States. So we do have a lot of instances of knowing that a lot of our queer rights, a lot of our queer civil liberties, quote, begin in these urban spaces, these urban cities. With activists, with Stonewall activists like Marsha P. Johnson, really give a lot of scholars to produce and describe this urban bias within queer frameworks of queer history, and makes the framework of rural queerness as something temporary, transitional, or incomplete, something that precedes a migration to the city rather than something that's sustained in a physical place, specifically rural America. The work begins from the premise that this bias reflects archival conditions and not lived reality within queer society and queer history. Often, a lot of queer folks are overlooked in rural spaces, even though we've actively been present and here within these areas for millennia. Even prior to colonialization of the United States and of North America, queer lives have been active and present within rural spaces. And my research really begins on understanding that urban bias versus rural queerness and how a lot of queer history, queer archives are rooted in this urban bias and forget rural queerness and rural queer stories. I'm going to have a lot of coffee breaks, so just a heads up. Any student that has me knows I'm always drinking coffee. All right. So why the Ozarks and why the Ozarks matter? The Ozarks are not interchangeable with other rural regions. It's something very specific. This place matters. Local histories of land use, religion, labor, and self-reliance shape how queerness is lived and negotiated here in this region. If you look here, Batesville is down here in the southeastern corner of the Ozarks. I live right over there in that little area. Right on the southeastern edge of the Ozarks. And a lot of the areas I travel are right here through the southern region of the Ozarks. Eventually, with this project that I'm going to be showing y'all, I eventually want to start gradually reaching up a little further into the Ozarks. But as of now, I'm really trying to centralize my region and getting my footing correct before I start this larger, ambitious project. But my research does not attempt to generalize rural queerness. Instead, it insists on regional specificity that is grounded in knowledge, understanding queerness as it is a lived place rather than just a lived space, and under these specific conditions that we have within the Ozark region. Understanding rural queerness requires attention to these conditions in which it's under which people choose discretion over visibility. In rural areas, social networks are often overlapping and unavoidable. Institutions are very limited, and anonymity is very fragile within these rural areas, especially within rural America, and especially for queer bodies and queer voices in this area. In the United States, approximately 9 to 10% of adults in the United States identify as LGBTQ+, yet this percentage drops dramatically in rural America. If you look here in the circle, this is the Ozark region. Of course, it does go a little bit gradually up in this area, but I wanted to point out this region in particular. Only 3 to 5% of people living in rural America identify as queer or LGBTQ+, approximately 3 million people that live within these rural communities that are queer. Specifically in this Ozark region, you do see some pockets of queerness being a little heavier in this little region. Does anyone know what that little spot is right there? Yes, Eureka Springs. Speak up, guys. I can't hear down here. But yes, Eureka Springs. Eureka Springs is kind of coined the queer capital of Arkansas. And we are very lucky to have Eureka Springs in the Ozark region because it is an area where we see this archive thrive, where we see queer archives continue to push boundaries and continue to be adaptable because it is within that city landscape. But you can see a larger absence of queerness outside of these regions of Eureka Springs, Fayetteville, and of course Springfield, Missouri as well. Of course, this map only shows same-sex couples. It also is missing the individual aspect of queerness. So we are missing some percentages here within this map. But the demographics alone, studies also show that LGBTQ plus individuals in rural areas experience lower levels of perceived community acceptance and reduced access to affirming healthcare and supporting services. Under these conditions, queer life often requires careful self-management rather than public declaration. I like to really reframe that phrase and bring it back again. Careful self-management rather than public declaration. And it's because us as queer bodies, we have to give you the permission of who we tell we are queer, how we present ourselves within these spaces. And it's because of the utmost safety for our well-being. This does not mean that rural queer life lacks community, though, within these spaces. Rather, it means community is frequently informal, more private, and temporary. And through these discrete gatherings, very fleeting encounters, and these odd and very weird networks that queer folks have built in this region and built within rural America, there's very few durable traces of it, which makes it harder to archive within these popular queer archives. And that leads to this new project, which is in care of Port Arkansas. I'm soliciting anonymous handlet letters from queer folks around the Arkansas Ozarks, asking them to give them their lived experience within this region. I distribute these invitations discreetly, whether it be through homes displaying pride flags, through maybe seeing an equality sticker on someone's bumper, throwing a letter into the windshield. And I really am trying to find a way in which I can outreach and create this more living archive through the Arkansas Ozarks. I provide my P.O. box number in Court, Arkansas, so they can respond anonymously. And these letters allow contributors to control how they are represented as much as they want to reveal and whether their words circulate beyond the envelope. This method really tries to prioritize narrative agency over categorical data and treats storytelling as oral history and a form of knowledge to protect rather than to lose and to not be able to see through archive. I love that. Thank you, Ghost of Newport. But this is not a survey. This is not a research survey. I'm trying to teach this. I'm trying to treat this process of listening and building a network of queer folks through the Arkansas Ozarks, so that we can have a moment of reflection and to notice that we are here physically and we are here trying to be present within the space and not forgotten through these more common archives. And I'd like to read this letter to you all real quick. This is my first letter I received. I don't know who will ever read this, but I guess this is sort of the point. I've lived in the Ozarks my whole life. Same ridges, same church bells, same gossip that somehow makes it across 3 county lines faster than phone service ever does. I always felt different growing up, but I didn't have the words for it. I knew I liked boys, even when everyone told me I would, quote, grow out of it. I didn't grow out of it. I work in a feed store in town. Folks mostly leave me alone, but sometimes someone will slip and say something ugly, and suddenly I remember I'm not as invisible as I think. Still, there's a strange comfort here. The fog hanging low in the mornings, the cows bawling down the road, and the stars so bright you could almost hear them. These things feel like home, even when the people don't. I don't want to leave. I want to belong right here, with my accent, my boots, and my soft heart. I just want this place to love me back, maybe someday. Anonymous. Oh, sorry, I get a little emotional every time I read these letters. With this, there is such a heavy emotional burden with this archive because I'm taking in so much information that kind of overloads my system sometimes. So if I get emotional, just bear with me. So how do I do this research? How do I conduct this research, and how do I find these connections? Simply through driving. With the truck I just got this last spring, I've already put 15,000 miles on it, and I just got the truck. And through this, I'm driving around, I'm trying to find those homes with pride flags. I'm trying to find slight little ways that I could see maybe, oh, that might be someone who's queer, maybe that person's gay. Who knows? How do I find these people? And through that, and through friends and through folks that have become almost akin to me in this project, I'm able to meet with them at restaurants. There's lots of eating involved. Lots of eating. I've had to maybe start a diet because of all the eating I've been doing. And for most of you who don't know, on Fridays I don't teach, so Fridays are dedicated to this project. I'm going out, I'm doing my research, I'm trying to find folks, I'm trying to find other queer bodies. And what kind of kickstarted this project for me is moving here from the larger Denver metroplex, but originally being from the rural South, I felt this emptiness again happen. I felt like I came to Lyon. I knew who I was and I knew what I represented, but it felt like I almost couldn't find my other queer friends. Of course, I was lucky enough to find a good group here at Lyon, but outside of Lyon, there's just not much queer representation. We do have Pride Fest, and that's a phenomenal place to find other queer folks. And that felt like that was the first moment while living here that I found community, that I could see myself reflected in the space that I'm living in. But it felt like I went back home to my hometown and I was in high school again, looking around, desperately searching for other queer folks. And it just became so tenuous and so palatable that I couldn't stand it. I needed to find other queer folks. And something that, again, really kickstarted this too is coming to Lyon and meeting my phenomenal students, my students that are part of the Spectra Alliance. And I've been able to hear some really beautiful stories from these students. But something that was so upsetting to me when I started here 2 years ago now, at the ripe age of 26, some of my students were like, "You're the oldest queer person I've ever met." And that was something so jarring to my mind and so just upsetting that I had to find others. I had to find others. So how do I do this? Again, I meet with other folks. I meet them in these weird, odd alleys throughout these rural spaces. And I'm even lucky enough to be able to meet them in their homes and be able to interview some queer folks in their homes, hear their stories, listen to them. And though sometimes these letters don't come in as physical letters, they come as letters that I put together the words for them. They proofread them and they accept them and they're added to this archive. But again, as I was saying earlier, this project has become, one, this beautiful awakening of queerness within the Ozarks that I'm noticing there's so many queer folks we're just hiding. And how do we make this connection and make this blossom? And again, back to being this quote queer elder for a lot of these students here, back to that urban bias, we have a lot of data and documentation about how the AIDS crisis really affect urban spaces, how the AIDS crisis affect New York City, how it affects San Francisco, how it affects Chicago, LA, but we don't have any actual data on how many queer folks were lost during that crisis in rural America. No one's put the numbers to the percentages of the deaths, and a lot of queer folks who died of AIDS in rural spaces purposely asked to not put that on their death certificate, not to embarrass their family, their church, or their local community. When coming here and finding out I'm, quote, a queer elder, it's because we have lost so many people in this rural community, not only to them leaving and going to the urban spaces, but also the AIDS crisis. And I think that's something that's typically overlooked. And through meeting some people, I've been able to find folks here in this area that have always been queer, but maybe just not ready to come out. This is a man, which I'll keep his name anonymous, who I was able to meet right before he passed away. And he gave me a lot of his photos and a lot of his stories that he had through his time living in the Ozarks and being an active member in this rural community. But through this, he never could come out. He could never come out and tell people who he was, even though he had a lot of boyfriends, even though he had a lot of people that he knew he was gay, he just couldn't say the words and he couldn't speak out. And through this beautiful project, I've been able to find these little hidden pockets of queer folks that want to tell their story, but just don't have, I guess they don't want to risk losing their identity through their community. And it's because in these communities, sometimes you're welcomed. In Batesville, I felt very beautifully welcomed here, and especially on this campus, but there's a lot of queer folks that don't feel the same and don't feel like their stories can be told and maybe can only be told through a story like this where you could be completely anonymous, but still get your life out there and still get your story out there. And his story is littered through this archive. He's the only person to have multiple letters from because he asked to have multiple. And just kind of circling back to this region again, this is the general region that I've driven through. I've only gone about this far, but you can see where some people that know each other, I've been able to break through Eureka Springs. I've tapped into Missouri a little bit. I'm still trying to tap into what I'm doing with Missouri just right now. Because that means this archive is going to start branching further north into the Ozarks. And I've been able to even meet people in Fayetteville who then know people in between Fayetteville and Batesville that are able to contribute to this project and be able to share their voices and share what they've gone through. But anonymity is something that's not only an ethical position, but something that's necessary for this project. I wouldn't see it as something that's limiting, but as foundational to this ethic of care. and being able to be the caretaker for these letters. And this letter in particular reads, I just realized I printed out the wrong one, so I'll read it off of this. I'm 19, closeted, scared, gay. I don't even know how to write this without shaking. My parents are, well, they're the kind that think being queer is something you catch like the flu. I'd spend a lot of nights parked on the ridge outside town just so I can breathe. I watch these highlights below and I wonder how many people down there feel the way I do. Probably more than anyone admits. I'm writing this because I want to believe I'll be able to that I'll be able to get to be myself someday. That I won't always have to hide on my phone, delete my messages, rehearse lies. I want to stay here, I really do, but I don't feel like if this place will ever let me grow into who I'm supposed to be, I hope it will. I'm trying to be patient. And this is something that a lot of queer folks go through. I mean, I personally didn't come out until I was 22 years old, and it was because I was shakingly anxious just like this with my own family. But by being able to center this anonymity, especially in rural contexts, this visibility operates differently than identity here in rural South. And a lot of people have to code switch to be able to have the necessity of survival in the rural South. But I'm really trying to reject the assumption that queer subjects must perform visibility for this project in order to be legible or seen, but instead the project centers on this consent, protection, and care for it to be an outlet for these people to be able to tell their stories without being held responsible for coming out too soon or people finding out who this is from, and so on. Oh, sorry, throat's getting very dry. But one of, back to the archive again and again, one of the biggest things I like to say is that driving this on these insights on something that's not typically recognized through archives, really I'm trying to prioritize these infrastructures of powers as they relate to what we see in the archive and how can we dismantle that a little bit. Queer histories already really struggle with institutional recognition, and rural queer histories even add an additional barrier as they often lack the material conditions necessary to be preserved. The letters again are gathered through this, as I gathered through this project, archive more than just what a general record would. I'm trying to archive this emotional knowledge, this lived experience, and the everyday survival rather than public milestones within queer history. Because again, when we think of queer history and all these archives, we think of these massive monuments to queer liberation, queer civil rights, and forgetting the everyday unexpected lives of queer folks. And this intervention really is how is history produced rather than just how is history seen through this larger marker of queer presence. And within this letter here, I'd like to read, I'm a trans man living in the outskirts of Mountain View. Some days I feel invisible, some days I feel like a neon sign. Depends on who I run into at the gas pump. My transition hasn't been easy. The nearest affirming doctor is hours away. The pharmacy always acts confused when I refill my prescription, even though I've been doing it for years. But I've been able to meet pockets of love I never expected. A coworker who started using my right pronouns before I even asked, a neighbor who defended me at a town function. I used to think I had to get out of the South to survive. Now I think surviving here is its own kind of pride. And it kind of circles back into this archive, though there is a lot of weight to this archive and weight to these stories that I'm hearing, there is so many folks that want to be here, that we want to live within this space and not only to survive, but also thrive in these spaces. So why this work and why now? This work exists because silence has consequences. Silence, especially in queer lives, have consequences. And when queer lives in rural places are undocumented, they're more easily erased, misrepresented, or dismissed as anomalies rather than communities. The absence of records don't just shape history, it shapes policy, belonging, and whose lives are considered legible and worth protecting. And this project is really linked to this urgency that is tied to time. We are in a very interesting transitional period within the history of the United States. A lot of people in queer research and academia are starting to label this time period another lavender scare. Does anyone know what a lavender scare is? So in queer research and history, a lavender scare, if you don't know, is when a lot of our laws, protections, and our societies are kind of turning against queer folks. There's a lot of tension in America right now, especially being a queer person in America. And rural communities in the Ozarks are changing so rapidly through economic shifts, displacement, political pressure at data centers. Didn't think that would ever be a problem, but apparently it is. Ooh, hello, sorry. Try and just scroll down, but I guess not. But stories that are not gathered may never be recoverable, and especially stories of today. And especially in a moment where it feels like being queer in America can be something fleeting, can it be something that we could stand in our ground and be here? But it's not about the nostalgia of the present or the past, but it's about witnessing lives as they're being lived in the present before they're either flattened or forgotten within our modern times. There's also a responsibility embedded in this work that I'm doing as well. As someone who is queer, living within this region, working with within this region, I'm also implicated in how these narratives are collected, framed, and shared because I'm also a part of this community. I'm not someone outside looking in. I'm not someone who is trying to strip this from any community because I am a part of this community. And I think that's something to bring up too, is that how this project really started enveloping and developing so naturally is because I feel like I'm not invading a space. I feel like I'm being welcomed into this space because I am a part of this space and I'm a part of this queer experience here in the Ozarks. And this project really, I'm trying to resist this extractive documentation, again, by prioritizing this anonymity, consent, and participation control, and acknowledging that visibility is not always safe, and that care must be given in this type of research. And truly, to me, if this work does not exist, then it's establishing that these other archives and these other histories will dominate and erase what queer rural experience is here in Arkansas, making it more marginal or even non-existent. And this practice really insists that I'm not trying to speak for others, but I'm just trying to hold and to be a record keeper for this experience. It's so much that I can't even explain all into words why this project is so important to me. Of course, I just gave you a bit of an explanation, but it's just there's so much more here that I feel like I can't give you all the explanation unless you could see the entire archive. Because currently, as it stands, as of literally this morning, I have over 100 letters. Through my website where these letters are being archived, I only have about 15 up, and it's because I'm physically typewriting the letters within this practice from the letters, whether they be emails or physical letters, and I'm physically typewriting these. So then it not only preserves anonymity, but it puts a little bit more labor into the practice and a little bit more love into these letters. I know exactly what's on these letters. I see them, I'm rewriting them for them and trying to keep this anonymity. And of course, as an artistic practice, this might not be the most illustrative or most beautiful or flashy practice that you've ever seen, but to me, it's still just as important. I feel like being able to preserve this history and function as this holder of this beautiful, beautiful lived experience has really been able to blossom my studio and how it operates not only as a studio, but along with qualitative analysis, identifying patterns and tensions within rural spaces, especially in the Ozarks. And the art is really not as separate from the research, but it really becomes this analytical tool to be able to showcase we're here, we're queer, we're present within rural Arkansas. This letter in particular, this is one of my favorite letters. She's someone that I was able to meet at one of the restaurants that I was eating at and was able to talk to her and be able to meet with her. But abbreviated, what she wanted to tell me was, I run a small town roadside diner. I'm a dyke. Though I wouldn't say that out loud unless I trusted you, folks around here like my biscuits, and that buys me a little safety. Food always has. Every so often, a gay kid will come in with dyed hair or a rainbow pin on their backpack, and I make sure to treat them just a little extra kindly. Not in a way that anyone would notice, but in a way that they can. A second refill of another sweet tea or you're welcome here type smile. I've been with my partner for 17 years. Most people think she's just my cousin who moved in, and we don't correct them. Because it's not because we're ashamed, but because peace of mind is a different kind of wealth. One day I'll hang a pride sticker at the door, just small and near the cash register. I'm working up the courage. And to give you more context on her, she's in her 60s and still struggling to be able to not only accept herself, but accept the space in which she's living in. Because this space, and especially in today in rural America, the tensions are at the highest peak they've been in over a decade. I want to end this presentation with a question. What does it mean to take on rural queer life seriously? And how do queer lives persist in rural Arkansas? It means recognizing that queerness does not belong only to the cities. It means understanding that history depends on documentation, and documentation depends on the conditions that have not always existed in rural communities. And it means building archives where none were previously possible. Queer people have always been here in the Ozarks, and the question is whether we're willing to listen and we're willing to be able to hear their stories. And even though these stories can become so weighing, especially on me as the keeper, I think it's just so incredibly important to continue this conversation, especially in a time like right now. If you know anyone or if you're someone that might want to contribute to this is my P.O. Box in Court, Arkansas. You're more than welcome to spread this information anywhere you'd like. And thank you so much for coming to my presentation. Is there any questions? Yeah.
So I know that the project you did kind of similar to this, where you took down like statements from various hunters, and then you enclosed them inside of like a kind of sculpture thing. With this piece, are you intending to have some kind of like sculpture or like physical media to go alongside the letters, or are the letters standing by themselves as the piece?
So letters will be the piece by themselves, and I should have maybe explained that some too. These letters, of course, are physically typed on that typewriter, and they're currently being framed and getting prepared for an exhibition in Bentonville later this April. So I'm trying to rapidly, as quick as I can, click, as quick as possible. My poor husband's ears have been tortured for the past few weeks while I've been trying to process these letters, but the letters themselves are the artwork. Because I don't think they need more. I think as they are by themselves and as they stand by themselves, just being in a space where, in a moment where people can read these stories and be a part of this lived experience is enough. And thank you for bringing up that past project, because this project really did kind of stem from not only moving here, but a project I did in Eastern Kansas where I interviewed 5 closeted hunters during a residency that then they wrote letters to put into the sculptural objects that I replicated, to be able to get their stories out there, but not to be able to give up their identity. So that project did kind of lend itself into this new project, but being able to put those letters out into the world rather than just hiding them into a sculpture. Yeah.
How do you like start these conversations with these people? Because like I know obviously it'd be very nerve-wracking for most of them. So
yeah.
I'm just like wondering how you get that even going in the first place.
Well, it's incredibly awkward. And sometimes you miss, and then that's even more awkward. When you're like, so are you like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, sorry. And that's something to bring up too, is that this project is kind of dangerous. I'm kind of running into like some spaces that might have not seen, or at least not that they know of, a queer person in maybe almost their entire life. I'm like in the boonies of the Ozarks. And that's why most of the time I have little letters saying like, here's my project, here's what I'm doing, here's my PO box if you're willing to participate. If you have further questions, you can reach out to me at this email. So I put a lot of me out into it. And because of that, I do run into the risk of people coming after me, especially people think that what I'm doing is not okay, and is something that's against what is traditional around this region. Most of the time, though, I get lucky because my radar is apparently good. But I have had instances where I've seen someone like shred the letter and throw it. But I'll leave it on windshields. I'll leave it in mailboxes. That's how I try to typically do it, so then I can try to avoid conflict. But it sometimes is almost impossible to know what's going to happen or if a reaction happens. But most of the time I'm meeting with people in restaurants and other places, it's after they've already received a letter and reached out to me. Yeah.
Do you see an end goal to this project, if there even is an end?
I think this is one of those projects that will last as long as I can keep it going. And my eventual goal would be to transfer it to someone who can continue it. Because again, this is a living archive. I don't want it to ever be stagnant or something of the past. I want to continue to find these stories, and I want to continue to share them in a way that shows that we are present here in the Arkansas Ozarks. So I'm trying to work closely with other archives like Invisible Histories, which is Invisible Histories, an archive within the rural South that is trying to document queer history in the southern parts of the United States. And they just opened up Arkansas as a possible state within the last 3 weeks. So I'm working closely with them to try to bridge that archive over to them, further from just my website, but over to someone who actually has an archival database to be able to share that knowledge with others. Yeah.
What would you say is like the typical, like the predominant age demographic for the people who have participated in this?
It's a weird, there's that gap I was talking about this, like almost this absence of elder representation. I have a lot of young people, a lot of people that are like age 19 through 25. There's a lot of people from that age gap. And then the next age group I would say are people in their 40s, and then the next one's like people in their 80s. So if we go back to this slide, she is 83 years old, and we were able to sit down and be able to listen to her story. As you can tell, we've been there for a hot minute. There's multiple water bottles sitting there, and I was able to listen to her entire life story through her experience here in Arkansas, being born and raised in the Ozarks and never leaving. So there's these odd gaps, and I want to say those gaps are not only due to the AIDS crisis, but also moments in history where a lot of queer folks felt the necessity to leave rural America and to get to the city for safety. So there's an odd age range. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, are you gonna share us the website too?
Yes. Oh my God. So sorry. I probably should have done that. It is just CodyNorton.com, and it's under my tab in care of Court, Arkansas. And of course, anyone here, you're more than welcome to email me anytime if you have questions. Any other questions? Okay. Before I wrap up, I do want to say for students here, I have my book database here where I get a lot of my thoughts, a lot of other scholars who are trying to research these areas within rural America, and some other art-related books as it relates to this practice. If you're interested in come seeing these books, they're here. Don't take them. These are mine. Especially my Lucy the Hard book. I would freak out. But thank you all so much for coming. If you have any questions, I'll be here for a little bit. And again, thank you so much. Have a great night.
Remember there's snacks.
That too.